Hi, my name is Riley, and today I will be talking about the influence of corporations on indigenous communities. The Ojibwe people have extracted copper in their historic region for many millennia. This region is rich in copper, especially in the Lake Superior, Ontario area. The Ojibwe people detail a mythology that explains the protector of the lake, the Mizabizi. The Mizabizi is a panther-like creature that gets angry when too much copper is extracted from the lake, and when doing so will bring a person bad fortune. This story highlights the balance of greed within the environment and respecting the wishes of spiritual idols. Copper is seen as a sacred material used for many ritual practices, and copper deposit sites are spiritual healing sites used by shamans. These mines were heavily respected, coined the term Meme Guashiuk, showing gratitude and reciprocity to deposit areas. Large mining companies knew of this region's rich deposit of copper within the lake and wanted to capitalize on that. With the knowledge of these deposits of a high profit material, a process began with a treaty formation in the early 1500s. The French settlers had an initial respect for the Ojibwe people, but then the disclosing of rich copper sites lighted the fuel for illegal mining to begin in sacred regions and ignored the wishes of the Ojibwe people based on the idea of profit, a Western ideology. Free entry mining became popular. This system enabled citizens to reap the free gifts of nature for their personal profit. This sparked the Ojibwe people to push for the protection of their lands as these copper deposits held high spiritual value in the fight against this colonization of their land. A treaty was created named Treaty 3 that granted the Ojibwe people rights to their land, but there was a massive loophole. The Ojibwe people had surface rights, but not mineral or subsurface rights, allowing the mining of copper to continue for private citizens with no consultation of the Ojibwe people. The government ended up ignoring the rights given to the people in agreements, but royalties and mining operations would be entitled to the province and then the rest for the indigenous people. Later, the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People, or UNDRIP, passed a resolution which intended to empower the indigenous and reassert their right to manage resources on their delegated land to their own discretion, lighting the way for an international framework of indigenous sovereignty. Today, these regions are still being mined and exploited, and the Ojibwe ideas and stewardship are being ignored. As in the next slide, in Minnesota, the Mizabi Iron Range has historic deposits of iron that was capitalized by the U.S. since the early 1800s. Currently, there are 7 active mines. The Mizabi Iron Range was previously home to many indigenous groups, including the Ojibwe, using the dynamic ecosystem before the large mines as ancestral hunting, fishing, and spiritual regions. However, this region has been dominated by a settler's perspective. They take pride in their mining communities, and mining industries have a dominant stand within these towns. These dominant perspective has often undermined the millennia of history indigenous people have within the land. The land has been terraced and dug into, being turned into one of the world's largest open pit mines. This large scar in the earth brings in millions of tourists to this region every year, along with bringing in millions of dollars of tourism to local economies. In the mid 1800s, a treaty named the Copper Treaty gave or ceded parts of Lake Superior region to the Ojibwe people, securing the surface rights in that region, like access to hunting, fishing, and conducting stewardship to that region, but not the mineral rights. These regions leave no room for explanation to the indigenous people and have historically ignored their rights. Over time, the treaty was nearly impossible to abide by because of severe environmental degradation and change in ecosystem, making these ancestral subsistence activities nearly impossible to enforce, in which extractive processes could continue. The Iron Range has 3 famous mines: the Rochelle Pit, Whole Rust Mine, and Sudan Underground Mine, all of which are open to the public and bring tourists from around the U.S. These mines highlight the grand fact of supplying the demands of millions of citizens across the US and even helping in the early world wars. However, in these museums, there is little to no recognition to the indigenous people who are affected by mining, leaving a very important perspective out of the equation. This leaves the Western settler perspective as the main viewpoint many people are left with when visiting these sites. The awe and astonishment gives people the wrong idea about the extremely extractive and exhaustive landscape, leaving the mine's true colors in the shadows. With new extraction needed for clean energy, who knows how these regions may be affected in the future if legislation is not put into place to regulate mining operations and the ability to obtain social licenses. The Ojibwe were successfully able to stop a mining project in part of the EPA's concern of sulfide waste. The projected plant would release sulfides into the water, affecting wild rice, an integral part of the Ojibwe culture, subsistence, and migration. Now, let's move into the Arctic. The mining potential in the Arctic is high, with high deposits of nickel, copper, petroleum. Development of Arctic can have high economic value, helping boost Canada's economy. Along with that, the land rights within these territories belong to the Inuit people. Delegations of land acknowledgements fall under the Nuvant Land Claim Agreement and UNDRIP, which gave Indigenous the right to participate in decision-making in development projects and require companies to consult during this process. Due to this gave an opportunity to the native Inuit to be employed in development projects like the Raglan and Meadows Bank operations, which are current operations as of 2020. There was a cost-benefit study of economy and societal effects done on Native communities affected by mining in that region. It was shown that the schedule, a 2-week on, 2-week off basis, helped promote cultural activities, gave people a steady income and more technology, allowing them to more easily participate in cultural activities. However, there were still negative impacts. There was an overcrowding problem in home villages, and people saw conditions at the mine better than at home. Mental health of workers became poor, an increase of drug use, and Western influence highlights the fear of cultural abandonment. However, many people in the Inuit region still prefer having the mine as an economic support, but there is still an awareness of the effect the mine has on subsistence activity, such as the caribou migration. Roads fragmented habitat, causing caribou migration to change. Also, mining activities cause the climate in the Arctic to change rapidly due to dust on snow, causing the snow to melt faster. And the distance from being away from home causes cultural values to be pushed away from people. The Northwest Passage is also within the territory of the Inuit people. The Inuit people use the Northwest Passage at all times of the year. However, the Northwest Passage has been declared international waters because the passage has been used across human history. However, with the Inuit use, this gives Canada some jurisdiction based on the 1993 Nuvant land claims, giving formal right to the Inuit people to use and regulate the land as they please. Sadly, development in these remote areas have seldom consulted any Inuit in projected projects that have happened in this region. Now, let's talk about the Cree of Ewe Ishe. There lies an asymmetrical power balance within the Cree Nation and the Canadian government. Mining and hydroelectric power has drastically affected these regions due to free mining principles and the disregard of free and prior informed consent. Companies prioritize profit over other interests. Within the Cree culture, Iujujuin, the Cree way of life, promotes respect and reciprocity within the land. Mining and hydroelectric dams have little respect and reciprocity of the land, destroying everything in its path. There is work being done to give the Cree community self-determination to fight and refuse colonizing ways of thinking about the land. The Cree Nation of Wenjami has exercised their sovereignty by participating in discussions based on mining projects operating in their territory. Of course, the signed land rights only protect surface rights, giving them the right to practice cultural subsistence and ways of life, but not the mineral rights. Companies do consult the Cree Nation and keep in consideration a set of agreements in mind. The IBA impacts and benefits analysis are discussed with Indigenous community members. The organization works to form agreements and settlements based on sovereignty and develop projects. An agreement made out of the IBAs for the Cree was the Opengau Agreement, which gave rights to compensation, employment, training, joint management opportunities, environmental mitigation measures, and cultural empowerment. But with all this promoting cultural and tribal sovereignty, these agreements really just give companies a way to get access to resource-rich regions within Indigenous communities. There is still a lot of development to be done, but Canada is in the forefront of development of these processes and procedures when dealing and seeking to understand Indigenous communities affected by corporations. Hydroelectric power is a form of extremely green and clean energy, using water flow to produce hydroelectric power that lights up cities and towns across the country. In Quebec, the Cree people have inherent rights to manage their land based on their principles. The large mega-project coined Hydro-Quebec lays on the East Main and Rupert River. Hydro dams flood regions deemed as uninhabited and vacant, but usually in these regions, that's far from the truth. The valley that the Hydro-Quebec flooded laid rest hundreds of Cree ancestors of the Iu-Itche. The hurt of the colonization and extractive practices left many community members feeling lost and as if their history was erased because of this dam. Glenna Matouche is an activist seeking the journey of spiritual relief because her ancestors were washed out with the flood. She remarks how even in spirit life, we walk the land we once inhabited, staking spiritual claims all throughout the land. Matouche has put forward many art pieces that represent the devastation faced by the Cree people when the dam was flooded. Glenna Matouche created a painting illustrating the loss of caribou migrating through the land when the flood happened, which is the picture on my slide. The landscape was left unrecognizable, but the sense of spiritual connection to ancestors due to burial sites is still strong and in the forefront of many people's minds. The James Bay Agreement had removed people from their land in order to flood the valley in the name of clean energy for the cities of Quebec. The displacement of home and destruction of it all shows the detrimental effects on culture and connection to these regions. The over-extractive, exhaustive measures of colonization of resources leaves a bad taste in many Indigenous communities' mouths, upsetting the delicate balance the environment has, and preventing these people from conducting traditional ways of life. At the Quebec Hydro Dam, there is a memorial set up with a deep meaning and recognition of the people, along with the land lost in the flooding of the valley. So thank you so much for listening to my presentation.